My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 61 years old, I like to believe I've learned how to keep my life peaceful. I grew up in a generation where women were often taught to swallow their discomfort, smile politely, and tidy up problems that weren't even theirs. But by the time I reached my 60s, I'd earned a quiet home, a stable job as a medical records supervisor, and a late-in-life marriage to a man named Thomas, gentle, steady, and kind in the way soft music is kind. At least, he was kind. His mother, Lorraine, well, kindness had skipped her entirely. Lorraine was 80 but carried herself like a queen whose throne had been unjustly taken. She had a permanent frown etched between her eyebrows and a specialty for making other people feel inadequate. Thomas used to joke that his mother could find fault in a sunrise. Too bright, she'd mutter. Trying too hard. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I kept my distance. Lorraine didn't like that. She believed daughters-in-law should revolve around her like obedient moons. Whenever I visited, she evaluated me like a piece of furniture, my shoes, my posture, my hair, even my voice. But I stayed polite. Civility costs nothing, and besides, Lorraine didn't intimidate me. I'd lived a real life, raised children alone, balanced finances through lean years, buried loved ones, survived heartbreak. A sharp-tongued old woman wasn't going to undo me. Still, I sensed something shifting in the months leading up to the incident. Lorraine's comments became less passive and more pointed. She hinted that Thomas and I were doing well for ourselves, asked intrusive questions about my paycheck, and mentioned her overwhelming expenses with theatrical sighs. She once asked if we were planning to contribute to her lifestyle now that we were married. I deflected gently, but unease settled under my skin like cold air. Then one Sunday afternoon, when we visited her little condo with grocery bags and a casserole, she eyed me with the sharp calculation of someone about to demand tribute. It wasn't the usual criticism. No, this look carried intent. I didn't know it yet, but Lorraine was preparing to cross a line she shouldn't have even approached. And soon, she would discover that while I am calm, I am not someone who tolerates entitlement. That afternoon, as she sat with her hands folded over her cane, she cleared her throat and studied me with a strange, expectant smile. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, too sweetly. "I've been thinking about your salary." I felt a prickle run down my spine. And I had no idea how far she planned to go. I only knew one thing: something was coming, and it would test every boundary I'd ever learned to hold. Lorraine waited for the room to quiet, savoring the moment as if it were a dessert she'd been saving. Thomas sat beside me, unaware of the cliff his mother was about to push us off. She took a breath. Then she said it, so plainly it nearly sounded reasonable. "I've decided that you should give me half your salary." Silence. Even the refrigerator humming in the corner seemed to pause in disbelief. I blinked at her. "I beg your pardon." "Well," she continued, waving a thin hand in the air, "now that you're married to my son, your income should support our family. That includes me. I raised him, after all. I sacrificed everything. It's only right that you show gratitude." She said gratitude as though it were a tax. Thomas sputtered. "Mom, what are you talking about? Evelyn and I manage our own finances." "We." Lorraine lifted her cane and tapped it sharply on the floor. "Thomas, hush. I am speaking to your wife." She turned to me with a poised expression. "Half is fair. It's generous, actually. And since you work in healthcare, I know you make a respectable amount." My pulse thudded. I'd known Lorraine was capable of arrogance. But this? This was audacity sculpted into its purest form. I responded slowly, calmly, because anger gives too much power away. "Lorraine, even if such an arrangement were normal, which it isn't, it wouldn't be your place to demand it." Her eyes narrowed. "So you're refusing to help me?" "I am refusing to let you dictate my earnings," I said. That was when she switched tactics. The bitterness came out like spoiled milk. "You've always thought you were better than me, haven't you? With your education, your job, your confidence. You think you're some kind of queen. Well, you're not. You married into my family, and I expect respect. I sat straighter. Respect is mutual. And I have earned it. Thomas tried again. Mom, stop. She ignored him. If you don't contribute, she said, I will tell everyone in the family how selfish you are. I will say you're mistreating me. And believe me, they'll take my side. It wasn't just entitlement now. It was extortion. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, not fear, but clarity. I'd spent my life meeting conflict with patience, with grace, with maturity. But there is a line where grace becomes surrender, and Lorraine had marched right across it. I rose from the sofa. Lorraine, this conversation is over. She leaned back with a smug smirk. Oh no, dear. It's just beginning. You'll see. I always get what I want. Perhaps she had gotten what she wanted in the past. But she had never crossed paths with a woman who knew how to protect her peace with evidence, truth, and quiet strategy. She was about to learn. On the drive home, Thomas kept glancing at me with a worried crease between his brows. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I didn't know she'd say something like that. It's not your fault, I said softly. But I need to understand why she feels entitled to my income. He exhaled heavily. My mother, she's always seen money as proof of loyalty. Growing up, she would tell me that if I really loved her, I'd give her part of my allowance. In college, she pressured me to send her half my work-study earnings. It was like she believed every dollar I earned belonged to her first. I stared out at the passing trees. So this isn't new. No, he said quietly. But I hoped marriage would make her treat you differently. I thought back to the glimmers of resentment I'd seen in Lorraine, how she bristled whenever I brought homemade desserts, as though kindness itself was an affront. How she inspected our wedding photos and commented that I looked a little too pleased with myself. How she once complained that I hadn't offered her my late husband's inheritance, as though widows carried spare fortunes in their pockets. She's threatened by your independence, Thomas said. She always expected to be the center of my life. When I married you, that changed. I sighed. And now she's testing how far she can push us. He nodded. She's used to people giving in. Well, that explained part of her motivation, but not all. Entitlement rarely grows alone. It roots itself in patterns, habits, long decades of unchecked behavior. The next morning, I received a message from one of Thomas's cousins whom I barely knew. It said, I heard you refused to support Aunt Lorraine. Very disappointing. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not anger, but recognition. Lorraine had already begun spinning her version of the story. That's when the first threads of my plan took shape. It wouldn't be revenge in the dramatic sense, not the kind with shouting or humiliation. I didn't believe in that. But I did believe in accountability, especially for someone who weaponized family loyalty. If Lorraine wanted half my salary, she was about to receive half of something else entirely, half a lesson. Half a mirror. Half a truth she had long avoided. But before I could deliver it, I needed to understand the full scope of her influence. And that meant diving deeper into the family's dynamics, history, and alliances. Thomas supported me without question. Tell me what you need, he said. I need to figure out who she talks to, and what she's telling them, I replied. I wasn't preparing for war. I was preparing for clarity. And clarity can be sharper than any blade. I started quietly, speaking to relatives one by one. Not to argue, not to defend myself, but to listen. It's remarkable what people will reveal when you simply give them silence. Thomas's cousin Leah sighed into the phone. Honestly, Evelyn, Aunt Lorraine has always tried to make everyone pay her bills. She guilt-tripped my dad for years. When he finally stopped giving her money, she told everyone he abandoned her. Another relative, Nora, confessed, she's been hinting that you're refusing to care for her in her old age. She makes it sound like she's destitute. Destitute. That was the word she used. I found that interesting, considering I'd seen her bank statements on her kitchen table weeks earlier: thick savings, a healthy pension, and a fully paid-off condo. Lorraine wasn't desperate. She was manipulative. Still, I didn't want to confront her with emotion. I wanted facts. So I gathered documentation, photos of her bank statements left in plain sight. Screenshots of her social media posts boasting about her vacations. Messages she'd sent relatives telling them I was financially starving her. Audio recordings of her remarks, perfectly legal in my state. And a detailed record of every expense Thomas and I had already covered for her that year. The truth was a mosaic, and I was assembling the pieces carefully. Meanwhile, Lorraine continued escalating. She sent group texts to the family, framing me as selfish. She told Thomas he'd married a greedy woman. She even stopped speaking to him for 3 days as a punishment. But I stayed composed. In fact, my calmness frustrated her. She expected tears or outrage. Instead, she received dignified stillness. One afternoon, she left me a voicemail dripping with condescension. "Evelyn, I'll give you one more chance to do the right thing. Half your salary. Monthly. I won't ask again." That message, saved and time-stamped, became the final document I added to my folder. The folder that would soon become the centerpiece of a very different conversation than the one Lorraine had planned. When Thomas saw everything I'd gathered, he stared at me with admiration. "You're incredible." "I'm prepared," I said. "And I'm patient." He squeezed my hand. "What now?" "Now," I said, "we invite her over." Because Lorraine believed she could rewrite reality with gossip. I was about to show her the written version, and there would be no rewriting this time. Lorraine arrived at our house wearing an expression of smug certainty. She walked in uninvited, as usual, tapping her cane as though announcing royalty. "Before you start," she said, "I want to know when I can expect the first payment." I gestured toward the dining table, where a neatly stacked folder waited. "Lorraine," I said evenly, "we need to talk." She frowned. "About what?" "About what you've been telling people," I replied. Her chin lifted defiantly. "I've only been telling the truth, that you refuse to support your husband's mother." I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. "Actually, this is the truth." I slid forward the first sheet, a printed screenshot of her boasting on social media about her recent trip to Napa Valley. Lorraine blinked. "What is this?" "Evidence," I said gently. "Of your financial comfort." I laid down the next sheet, photos of her bank statements she had left out during our visit. She stiffened. "You invaded my privacy." "No," I said calmly. "You left them open on your coffee table." I simply remembered what I saw. I placed the next document, a list of every expense Thomas and I had covered for her that year: repairs, groceries, medications. Her lips tightened. Then I placed the printed messages, her accusations, her guilt trips, her lies. One by one. A trail of manipulation laid bare in ink. And lastly, I played the voicemail, her demand for half my salary, her threat disguised as motherhood. Lorraine's face drained of color. "This is harassment," she sputtered. "No," I said softly. "This is accountability." She looked at Thomas for rescue, but he shook his head sadly. "Mom, this is wrong. You can't treat Evelyn this way. You can't treat anyone this way." Lorraine's eyes darted, searching for a way to regain control. I didn't mean it like that." "You're twisting things." "I haven't twisted anything," I said. "I've documented your exact words. Your exact actions." She swallowed. Her voice trembled. "So what happens now? You're going to expose me?" "No," I said. "I'm going to give you a choice." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and hope. "A choice?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "A choice that determines the future of this family." But before I could tell her what that choice was, she slammed her hand on the table. "No," she said. "No more of your tricks. I am your elder, and you owe me." Her voice rose sharply. And that's when I knew. She hadn't learned anything yet. But she would. Because the choice I was about to give her was not the one she thought she deserved. I leaned forward, hands folded calmly. Lorraine's voice cracked with anger, but I didn't raise mine. Power settles naturally into the quieter voice, the one anchored, the one unshaken. "Lorraine," I said gently, "you may be Thomas's mother, but you are not entitled to my income. Or my dignity." She scoffed. "You think you're so righteous. But I know how to get what I want." "No," I said softly. "You know how to bully. And there's a difference." Her nostrils flared. "I'm not a bully. I'm a mother demanding respect." "Respect," I said, "doesn't come from threats. It comes from mutual care. And you haven't shown that, not to me, not to Thomas, not to anyone." She was trembling, not from fear, but from the collapse of control. I continued, my tone even and unwavering. "I'm offering you a boundary. Not a punishment." She blinked. "A boundary?" "Yes," I said. "Here is the choice you have." I lifted one finger. "Choice 1, you stop spreading lies about me, stop demanding money, and treat us with basic decency. If you need help, real help, we will step in as family. But any manipulation ends today." She swallowed hard. "Or," I said, lifting a second finger, "choice 2, we cut contact. Completely. No visits. No calls. No financial assistance. Nothing." Her jaw dropped. "You can't do that," she whispered. "We can," Thomas said. "And we will, if you continue hurting my wife." Lorraine stared at him, her son, her lifelong pawn, and realized she no longer held the strings. "I'm giving you an opportunity to repair this," I said. "But I won't negotiate with entitlement." She looked between us, her eyes glossy with a mixture of rage, panic, and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of reflection. "You would really walk away from me?" she asked Thomas. He nodded. "If you force us to, yes." Lorraine's cane tapped against the floor in a trembling rhythm. "You're choosing her over me." "No," he said. "I'm choosing healthy relationships over toxic ones." For a moment, she said nothing. The room felt suspended in time, as though even the light was holding its breath. Then she spoke, her voice thin. "I need time to think." "You can have it," I said. "But understand, this boundary is firm. It doesn't bend." She stared at the folder on the table, the undeniable truth of her actions, and then slowly rose. Thomas walked her to the door, but she paused before stepping outside. "This isn't the end," she muttered. "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "It's the beginning of something healthier, if you choose it." She didn't respond. She left without saying goodbye. But what she did 1 week later, I never could have predicted. For 7 days, Lorraine was silent. No calls. No messages. No petty accusations relayed through cousins. The silence was so unfamiliar it felt like a change in weather. On the 8th day, we received a letter in the mail, handwritten, shaky, and uncharacteristically long. Thomas opened it, brows lifted. "It's from Mom." Inside was an apology. A real one. Not perfect, but sincere. She admitted she'd felt afraid of losing control, afraid of aging, afraid of becoming irrelevant. She confessed she'd used money as a way to maintain power. She even acknowledged that demanding half my salary was unreasonable and inappropriate. At the bottom, she wrote, "I will try to be better. I want a relationship. I do not want to be alone." I exhaled slowly. "This is unexpected." Thomas wiped his eyes. "I've waited my whole life to hear her say something like this." But a letter wasn't enough. Words are easy. Change is not. So we set conditions: therapy visits, monthly family discussions, and absolute honesty. Lorraine surprised us by agreeing. Not joyfully, not gracefully, but genuinely. And over the next few months, something remarkable happened. She softened. Not entirely. She still complained about the weather, the grocery store lines, the way Thomas folded towels. But she no longer demanded money. No longer undermined our marriage. No longer played the martyr. She even began asking about my life, tentatively, awkwardly, but trying. Consequences had not broken her. They'd woken her up. As for the rest of the family, once they saw the truth, once they realized she'd exaggerated her finances and manipulated narratives, they began treating her differently. Not cruelly. Just with clearer boundaries. The web of guilt she had woven for decades began to unravel. And she, to her own surprise, seemed calmer because of it. One afternoon, months later, while sipping tea at our kitchen table, she said quietly, "Evelyn, thank you." I raised an eyebrow. For what? For teaching me that limits can be loving. It was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging the lesson she'd been given. And in that moment, I knew we had all grown, her, Thomas, and yes, even me. But the true understanding, the deeper meaning behind everything that had unfolded, revealed itself later, during a quiet evening alone. A reflection I knew I wanted to share with others. I'm 61 years old, and life has taught me that revenge doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like truth. Sometimes it looks like quiet boundaries. Sometimes it looks like refusing to hand over your peace just because someone demands it. Lorraine learned a lesson, but so did I. I learned that people who lash out often do so from fear. I learned that boundaries aren't punishments, they're invitations to healthier relationships. And I learned that even at 80 years old, a person can change, if the consequences are clear and the truth is undeniable. Today, our relationship is imperfect but peaceful. And that, to me, is a far better victory than taking satisfaction in her downfall. Because ethical revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about dismantling the harmful behavior that once controlled you. If there's a moral to my story, it's this. Never underestimate the power of calm documentation, clear boundaries, and the courage to hold firm. People may resist, they may protest, but eventually, truth settles where it belongs. And if you're listening to this story, if you've lived through something similar, or watched someone distort reality to manipulate you, I want to hear from you. Would you have handled my situation differently? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? Tell me your thoughts. Your stories matter. Thank you for listening.